My name is John Shaibu from Mountup Infotech. Today, in this tutorial, I'll be teaching you the basics of lists. I'll be introducing you to what a list is. So, what's a list? Let's start with the definition of a list. A list is used to store multiple data at a time. A list is a collection of data which is ordered and changeable. In Python, lists are represented with square brackets. But as you have seen here, a list is represented with a square bracket. So, examples of a list. This is an example of a list. Names. This is a representation of how a list looks like. Let's now go into how a list is being constructed. In list, to store multiple values at a time, you have to store all your values inside a block bracket, and each item in the list must be in quotation mark, and it must be separated by a comma. It must be separated by a comma from the next value. So let me run this now. So names, I've run it. So I've stored all my values inside this variable, and I've given it a variable name, so which is names. So to test in Python, you can test the type of data type you are using by using this type names. By using this type, it's not necessary you use names, but you have to the name of the value you want to test to know the type of data type it is. So so now I will have to test it. So it's bringing out a list. That means I've just constructed a list. So in this tutorial, I will also be covering what is list indexing. In list indexing, these are the list indexing formulas. List indexing, for example, what is list indexing? For example, I want to access an item on this list. Let's assume I want to access Samuel, or I want to access Collins from my list of names. I will use what it's called list indexing. So these are the list indexing formulas. One, list A and B. This A and B representing your index number. And what is index number? Index number is the number or the position of the item on the list. And when you are indexing, you start indexing from 0. For example, on this list I've created, John is on index 0. You don't start indexing from 1. So this John is on index 0, Samuel is on index 1, and Collins is on, and so on and so forth. So when I'm indexing, so this A represents my first index number, and this B represents my second index number, and it has to be separated with a colon. So this formula prints from index A to index B minus 1. This B minus 1 means when you are printing your data, it does not print your data from index, it does not print the last data, but you have to increase it by 1. For like this formula, John, if I want to print from John to Collins, for example, let's take for example, if I want to print from John to Collins, I'll say names, the first index. What's the first index? My first index is 0. I will start with index 0, and I'm printing to Collins. But from the formula, it's saying that B minus 1. So I will have to increase it by 1 if I want to print to Collins, and Collins is on index 2. I will have to say, I will just, instead of writing index 2, because it's going to minus 1, I'm going to write index 3. If I should write index 2, from the formula, it won't print Collins. Can you see? It won't print Collins. So I have to increase it by 1 to be able to print the last value I'm printing to. So this formula from names into this second formula, for example, I want to print just one item from the list. if I want to print just one item from the list, I will start my indexing. I will just input the index just to print an item from the list. So this index to print out Collins, and this index 0 will print out the first value, the first item on the list, which is John. So from the second formula, which is list colon and bracket, square bracket, and column B. This formula prints, this is from index 0 to index B minus 1. For example, if I want to print from the beginning of the list, like I want to print from John, and I'm printing to, let's say, to Desmond this time around, and I don't need to specify the where I'm starting from. I don't need to specify where I'm starting from. I can just use column instead. This column, instead of writing 0, since I'm starting from the beginning, it will automatically assume I'm starting from the beginning of the list and I'm stopping on index 4. See, it's printing from John, Samuel, Collins, and Desmond from the second formula. For example, let's say I want to print all the list at a time. I can easily write the name of the list, but I can also use something like this to print the whole list. Names. This means I'm printing all the list. This means I'm printing everything on the list. But I can also write it like this to print everything on the list. But there are instances where you will need this method, this formula for printing a list. So from the fourth formula, list open square bracket column minus A. This starts from the beginning to index minus A. Let's take, for example, I have a very long list of names, like a very long list, like about 100 or 200. Instead of, I need the values from the beginning, let's say to the 5th to the last number. Instead of counting from 1, 2, 3, or I have an indefinite that I don't know the end. I don't know the end. I can start, and I need the values, the items on the list from the first number to the from the first item on the list to the 5th to the last item on the list. I can start my indexing. I can use negative indexing. This negative indexing, from this formula, it shows I'm starting from the beginning, as we said earlier. I'm starting from the beginning, and I'm going to index -5, like it's moving from the back. And when you are using negative indexing, you don't have to start indexing from there. You start your indexing from 1. Like, for example, let's take this as an example. Okay, it's print this for. I'm using this example. I want to print from John. I want to print John, Samuel, Collins, but I don't need Desmond. I can use negative indexing to print out everything. Like here, I said John, names, open square bracket, column, -2. -2 means it's printing to Collins. It's starting is negative, is indexing index in like B from the formula. It's starting -B from the back. My second index number is starting it from the back. It's printing it backward. And from this last formula, list column -1. This formula is to reverse the whole list. For example, it won't reverse it alphabetically, but it will start from the last index. It will make the last index the first index, and the first index the last index. It will reverse everything. It will print it backward, like Richard, Desmond, Collins, Samuel, and John. Like here, let's test it. Okay, can you see Richard, Desmond? So that is all for introduction to list. Next time, see you next time in the next tutorial.